Hello and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. My name is James, your host. I started this podcast to help other folks share their own healing stories and to interview thought leaders and experts in the carnivore, keto, and low oxalate space. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Equip Foods and the Carnivore Bar. As an affiliate, you can use the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products when you check out using the code Carnivorist. Thanks in advance for listening, subscribing, and any likes or shares. And now, on with the podcast. Thank you for taking the time out, Scott, to join me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me on. You've had Casey and Ryan, some great guests, and now it's all downhill from here.
Definitely not, sir. You're very modest. Scott, just another quick thank you for everything that you do with Carnivoristcast, the podcast. Just amazing. I understand 4 years, over 200 episodes, and 2 million plus downloads. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's been a joy. It's quite a journey.
Oh my goodness. That's just incredible, man. Congrats on all your hard work. It's paying off, my friend. And I think, the testimonies that you have from various folks and, mine going on there, we'll talk a little bit about that later, the community aspect. And for me, Carnivoristcast was a community for me during COVID and helped me find my way out of my illness. So thanks again.
Of course. Yeah, my pleasure. It's been wonderful to have all the guests and listeners connect. And it is an awesome community.
Basically, what I'd like to do is just start out with your journey, give us a little background into Scott Myslinski and who you are and how you became who you are. And we'll talk about how you got into the carnivore diet. And what'll be interesting for some folks is we found out that you and I share a similar journey in that we did crew together, the rowing. And I'm interested to hear about that because,
sure.
That sort of catapulted you into the various diet avenues, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It did. I was a competitive lightweight rower for about 8 years. I started in middle school in 8th grade, and I rowed all through high school. Prior to that, I was a little overweight, eating not great standard American diet. I was a little bit of a rebel. I had been kicked out of one school. I wanted to drop out of school and join a punk rock band. And then I found rowing, and it gave me structure. It gave me something to work for. So I'd say it changed my life in a lot of very positive ways. But I did it for so long that, as with many endurance sports, runners will know, swimmers, you can develop a lot of injuries that way from overuse. And it also impacted my digestion and my metabolism because I was cutting weight so aggressively to make weight, similar to wrestling or other weighted sports in the US or other countries. And so I would sometimes gain and lose 20 pounds in a week and then do it all over again the next week. And a lot of that was water, but still it definitely affected my relationship with food. I was binging on the weekends after weighing in. And so coming out of school, I was looking for a way to maintain a healthier metabolism and weight without exercising as much. And so at the time, the slow carb diet from Tim Ferriss was very popular. I did that for a little bit, didn't really work well for me. And then I did more paleo and primal following Mark Sisson, was very popular at the time. And this was all kind of pre-keto. It was around 2014. So 8 years ago now. And then I slowly shifted closer and closer to what I would call a keto diet without macros. So a gentleman named Sam Feltham hosted a show that was kind of like the podcast before there were podcasts. It was called Smash the Fat. He is now the head of the public health collaboration in the UK, which is very similar to Nina Teicholz and the Nutrition Coalition here in the US. They're working to improve dietary guidelines, and he works with a lot of the great low-carb doctors over there like Zoe Harcum and Robert Lustig and folks like that. And so I had followed him, and the diet was essentially, minimize carbohydrates, eat a lot of healthy plant foods, or animal foods, and then, some nuts and avocados and fats like that. So I was eating that. I was already eating a lot of protein. I definitely wasn't following like keto macros. And then around 2016 is when I first found Amber O'Hearn. She was on the Two Keto Dudes podcast talking about how a lot of the research that vilifies red meat and cholesterol and saturated fat and eggs is the same research that's used to promote vegetables and eating a lot of plants. And it's this epidemiological research, which, if folks don't know, it's essentially research that asks people to report what they ate a long time ago and then sees, generally how healthy they are. But there are a lot of confounding factors. The people who eat more vegetables are usually people who go to the doctor more, who wear seatbelts, who don't smoke or drink. And so those may be the reasons they're healthier, not because they're eating more plants. And same with red meat. And so I thought that was interesting. And then she also talked about how plants can be harmful due to phytotoxins like oxalates and phthalates. And I thought that was really interesting. And I said, you know what? Hey, I'm already eating pretty close to a carnivore diet. If I just drops, the avocados and the almonds and almond flour and focus on eating as much meat as I want, and sounds great. Sounds like I can get the body of my dreams by just eating meat. And it was actually around the same time Sean Baker was starting his carnivore diet experiments. He was only on Twitter at the time, but I remember he was eating like 30 eggs a day and some of these weird things and a lot of cream. And so I gave it a shot. And I'd say I did a poorly formed carnivore diet. I didn't know a lot of the things I know now, and there weren't a lot of great resources that there are today, like books and podcasts. And so but I still had amazing results. It improved my digestion, it improved my energy, improved my sleep. I had, part of the reason I had bad digestion as well was due to taking NSAIDs, taking a leave basically every day while I was rowing due to my back pain. I wasn't taking large amounts, but I was taking it every day. And a lot of research has come out more recently that can be really disruptive to the gut, and also it can really hurt your hormones. And so I think carnivore helped me tremendously with that. And then I continued on a carnivore diet for 3 years strictly, improving it over time as my knowledge improved, starting the podcast in 2018, a couple of years later. And yeah, just refined it, and it got better and better. And it really helped me tremendously.
I'll just go back to the crew days, the rowing days, and it just reminds me when I talk to you of how crazy it was for me. It was like, I remember, because as you correctly said, you had to be 160 pounds, I believe, in an 8-boat.
Yeah.
And we were constantly trying to make weight, and it led to sort of disordered eating patterns for the whole crew. I remember wearing trash bags around school to sweat to make weight for the next regatta.
Yeah.
And when you look back on that time, Scott, would you say like that sort of led you into some maybe disordered eating patterns or just view on your own health and body type?
I think I was so concentrated on rowing that I didn't see anything else. Like, I didn't even lift weights because I thought lifting weights would create more muscle and it would make it harder for me to gain weight. And so it was just like anything at all costs to be a better rower. So I really had my blinders on. And that taught me a lot of good things. It taught me commitment, taught me how to balance that with school. It really gave me a lot of drive, but there were definitely things that were detrimental to my health. I think more so than the disordered eating, it was like what it did to my body physically. But yeah, I'm sure it had some aspect of that as well.
Yeah, it definitely made me more appreciate. I got a good teamwork, again, talking about community with the 8-man boat. I definitely got very fit doing it. I mean, those races, I have never felt so exhausted in my life, even running after a regatta race. It is just taxes you on every level, doesn't it? It was just extraordinary. Okay, so Scott, so far we've got up until, you starting the carnivore diet. You've talked a little bit great about the benefits that you saw. Were you still in crew while you were doing the?
No.
No, you had finished at that point, yeah?
Yeah. So I ended rowing in 2014, and then I started carnivore in 2016, and then followed it strictly until 2019.
Okay. Now, I know for a while, and we're going to get into your bodybuilding, weightlifting, sort of way of life that you're doing now in a little bit, but let's talk about that challenge. One thing that I found that I resonated with when I first listened to Carnivoricast and your journey was your challenges with rendered fat and your digestion and how you had to tweak it. So I just wonder if you could tell the folks the challenges you ran into and why you had to tweak your diet after being so strict for 3 years because of that.
Yeah. So even earlier in the 3 years, in the first year, like I said, there wasn't a lot of great information that there is now. And so I would cook, the fattiest burgers I could find, 70-30 even. And I would take all the fat and I would save it and I would eat it like ice cream, cold. It was actually delicious with salt. But that amount of rendered fat can cause all types of digestive issues, either constipation on one end or diarrhea on the other end and loose stools. And so I had a lot of issues with constipation, and more so than constipation, just like a lot of gas. I think part of the problem is that much fat and that much rendered fat slows down your digestion so much, which generally we want to digest things a little bit slower. Part of the problem with simple sugars is we digest them so quickly. But when you slow down your digestion too much, it can just kind of block you up. And then you're not really processing your food adequately. And this is totally separate from like people thinking they need fiber to pass stools. This is something else. And so I fixed that. And, I found a lot more success once I started focusing on solid fats, either from raw beef suet or just eating fat on my steaks and eggs and things like that. And then over time, as I got further into the carnivore diet, I was experimenting with a slightly higher fat approach, higher protein. And I always felt better when I increased my fat. But after 2 weeks or so of doing that, inevitably, I would start to get these symptoms where in the middle of the night, very far away from my meals, at like 3 a.m., I would have incredibly painful gas and bloating. And I would start burping a lot uncontrollably. And it would keep me up for hours, and it was really painful. And then I would be fine the next day. And I think I just had, my body wasn't able to digest more than, say, 150 grams of fat a day regularly. And I tried a lot of things. I used digestive enzymes. I used different fat sources. I did different meal timings. I tried not having any liquid with my meals. I worked with Judy from Nutrition with Judy. She's fantastic. And she helped me, but still wasn't enough. And so for myself, at the end of 2019, I was losing weight too quickly. And I was trying to maintain my weight. And I needed about 3,500 or 4,000 calories a day to do so. And the problem was that, when you're eating 150 grams of fat, that's like, I think the math is it's like 1,400 calories. And so that would mean I would need, 2,000 to 2,500 calories just from protein, which is like 500 grams of protein or more. And once you start getting to those really high numbers of protein in a day, it can have negative consequences too. It can cause a lot of excess urination from all the nitrogen. It can cause you to sweat a lot. And so that wasn't great. I was still performing very well in the gym, felt good, but I just needed something to try to improve my sleep and get past this digestion issue. And I consulted with a few experts, and one of them actually suggested starting to introduce some fruit at night. And so I started with that. I had one banana at night and a little bit of honey. And slowly but surely, I tried this slow food reintroduction method where I would try one food for 3 days, and then I would return to my baseline diet of carnivore diet. And I found which carb sources I could tolerate very easily and which I couldn't. And the basis of my diet was and still is animal foods. But now I'm able to tolerate a lot more of those foods, much better than I even did before the carnivore diet, which is pretty amazing. And I found which ones work really well for me and which don't. And so I've been able to expand and have more foods and also meet my goals, which are bodybuilding and putting on weight, which requires eating a lot.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Scott. When I heard that, it really, as I mentioned to you, resonated with me because coming from a vegan background and me transitioning, I had a ton of digestive issues going through the adaptation phase.
Yeah.
I still to this day supplement with betaine, HCl, and digestive enzymes to help me. It's getting better for sure. The initial period was very rough.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you before we go on to the next question, would you say then when you first started carnivore that you did become fat adapted, or was the fat the challenge and you never really got adapted to the high fat way of eating?
Yeah, I definitely became fat adapted.
Yeah.
Because my hunger went way down, my energy improved dramatically. I was very satiated between meals. I had no desire for carbohydrates whatsoever, and I was very good with being able to sustain long amounts of exercise or fasting without food. So definitely would say I became fat adapted.
Oh, okay, great. How long about did it take you to become fat adapted? Mine was I'll tell you, mine was challenging. It was a good 5 months or so for me.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think I became like in ketosis a lot more quickly than this, but yeah, it probably took 5 or so months. And I would say there were like stages to it.
Yeah.
More of a stepwise process than all of a sudden, click, you're fat adapted. So I noticed continued improvements over probably a year and a half.
It really speaks to you going through this experimentation and figuring out what works best for you. I did the same thing. And of course, my journey includes oxalates. I've always been interested to ask you whether or not you felt that oxalates were part of your journey, having come from sort of that paleo keto background, eating a lot of almond products.
Yeah.
But again, I'll let you sum this up very nicely, but it speaks to sometimes the dogma that is in the carnivore diet. And if you're not 100%, you're not doing it correctly. I do not agree with that. You need to do what is correct for you. And you highlight this better than me, so I'll let you speak to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think carnivore is definitely not black or white. I'd say it's a spectrum. And I'd say most people could benefit from eating a little bit more animal foods. And I think that's the message we should really focus on, not saying everyone has to eat only steak and butter for the rest of their life. And I think focusing on that message and starting with, how can we gradually improve our diets, and how can we do what feels best for us and what we can adhere to and what we can sustain. And, in my opinion, if you have a bit of dark chocolate at night or some avocados with your meal or whatever, you're not kicked out of the carnivore club. It's definitely a spectrum. And then with regards to your question about oxalates, yeah, I definitely think that was a factor, because especially when I was more keto, I was consuming a lot of nut products, a lot of almonds, and even back in the paleo days, I was eating a lot of almond butter and cashew butter, and then transitioning out of that, I think, did help.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for that. I've always been interested to ask you. And one last question before we move on, Scott. This is an interesting one for me because I actually found our good friends, Richard and the crew from Optimal Carnivore, through you. And I began, supplementing immediately when I left the vegan way of eating because I was so malnourished. And it also speaks to another thing where I've seen a lot of folks lately saying that, supplementation isn't necessary on a carnivore diet, and it's a waste of time and money. I do not believe that, because some of the supplements that I took were, as I mentioned to you, even betaine, HCl, and digestive enzymes. But moreover, the organ meats, I don't have access to good organ meats here in Bermuda. So having the desiccated form in a supplementation form is really beneficial to me. So I don't think it can be as black and white as certain people are making it. What are your thoughts? And I know you helped come up with the formulation of Optimal Carnivore. I'd love you to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Richard, it's funny. He reached out to me in like 2018, sometime very early on, when I was first starting the podcast. And he said, I live in Thailand. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I like starting companies. And I'm really interested in the carnivore space, and I think there's a gap, and I think I could make a great product. And he, asked me my opinion on a few different things, and supplements, and I talked about some of the existing ones in the space and where I thought it could be improved, and he said, okay, awesome. And I didn't hear from him for a while, and then about a year later he was like, hey, I made this product. I have Optimal Carnivore. I'm ready to get started. Like, can I advertise on your podcast? I was like, I wasn't planning to take any advertisements, but I feel like I kind of have to now. And so, yeah, it's been great. I continually use it to this day. I think it's an awesome product. Like you said, yeah. Do you need supplements? Do you need organs? I don't know. I don't think anyone can definitively say yes or no. But I think if you want to make sure you're including them in your diet, which I think there are great reasons to, and great evidence to support the idea that organs contain a lot of essential nutrients that we wouldn't otherwise get from just eating meat, muscle meat. I think desiccated organ supplements are fantastic because you can get the highest possible quality. So whereas you might, like you said, you may not have access to liver where you are, other people may not have access to high quality organ or liver, and you can get all of it in a capsule format that's very strong, a very strong source and a very strong method of preserving the nutrients, freeze drying. And yeah, it's really easy. It's really convenient. And so I'd say, try it, see how you like it. If it's going to stop you from doing the diet because you think you have to supplement or you think you have to eat organs, then don't. That's fine. But if it's something you want to try as an insurance policy or to see if it makes you feel better, then go for it.
Yeah, totally agree, Scott. I mean, I'll just finish on this point on this subject is that when I first started out and I had, no one following me on Instagram or anywhere else, Richard and Optimal Carnivore reached out to me and said, we'd like you to try one of our bottles, and sent me a complimentary bottle. So I was very, very grateful for that because they didn't know me from Adam, and
yeah.
I always say support those who support you, and they're a good bunch of folks there. I like their ethos that they plant a tree for every bottle sold. They're really good, and I really firmly believe that in terms of bang for your buck, that 9-organ blend is a really good product for sure.
Yeah, I really I like their liver as well. And yeah, Richard's awesome. He's a great guy.
So Scott, let's go into how you got into bodybuilding. I know it forms a very large part of your life and exercise routine now.
Yeah.
I think you have talked about Doug McGuff first got you into muscle training. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So when I was stopping rowing, I wanted to ask my dad, like, what do you think is the best form of exercise? He's a huge nutrition and exercise nerd. He reads a ton of studies. He always has. And so he was very into Body by Science and Dr. Doug McGuff, which for folks who don't know, he's a doctor who wrote a book about kind of the optimal way to exercise. And it's somewhat controversial, and I don't really agree with everything he says or is in that book now, but I think even he wouldn't. And so he wrote a book about how, focusing on intensity and focusing on training the muscles to failure is the best way to build muscle, improve strength, and get all the health benefits, dumping glycogen, improving metabolic function, improving mitochondrial function, all the brain benefits of exercise. The best way to get those is by working out very infrequently and training your muscles to complete exhaustion. So if you think about doing a push-up, going until not only you can't do any more, but when you're in the middle of the push-up, you're stuck and you keep pushing. So doing that with every exercise is kind of what he advocates. And he advocates only doing like one set per muscle group and doing it once or twice a week. And so it's very intense, very short workouts, but very safe. All the movement is very slow and controlled. So if you can think about like doing a leg press, you would do, 5 seconds or 10 seconds in each direction. So it's very intense. And so I did that for a good 4 years. And it worked well for me. I think, unfortunately, I was in a very suboptimal place hormonally, which we can talk about. But I didn't really increase my muscle that much. It did keep me in shape, but it didn't help me put on very much muscle. And it also, I think it was just not enough volume for me. Like I could have recovered for much more, but it worked well at the time because, I was working 90 to 100 hours a week, coming out of school, traveling a lot for work, very stressful, very intense. So it was good to do something that was very brief and infrequent. And then I slowly started moving out of that style of training, adding a little bit more volume, getting a little bit more exercises. I actually found out through a lot about bodybuilding and training and stuff through my good friend Lawrence Neal, who ran a podcast called Corporate Warrior, which actually Carnivoristcast wouldn't exist without him. He taught me everything about running and starting a podcast, and then he had a lot of guests on like Sean Baker or Rob Wolf, folks like that, and so I found him, got really into training and kind of diet, and all of that kind of meets together in a lot of ways. And so I was focusing on that. And then Jorge Fogerly, another guest he's had on, who is kind of straddled between this high intensity and doing a little bit more volume. I started following him and started adding a little bit more volume to my workouts. And then it's gotten to where it is today, where I'm very much doing like bodybuilding style workouts, more volume, still trying to be as safe as possible. And I've gotten to the point where I really enjoy the hobby of trying to improve my physique. I'm well past the point of, happy with the way I look. I'm very happy with the way I look. I think I was happy with the way I looked 30 pounds ago, but I'm really enjoying adding muscle and progressing in the gym. And it's something for me, working out and bodybuilding. And I think a lot of athletes will relate to this. It's having a very tangible thing that you can work towards and improve in a world where so many things we work towards are ambiguous. Like with work, a lot of the times your effort doesn't necessarily translate to a result because of politics, because of other people. But when you're in the gym and you work hard, you can see yourself getting stronger. You can see yourself improving in the mirror. And so that's what's really appealed to me about doing it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Scott, for that. I'm part of my journey now is definitely trying to put weight back on the carnivore diet because I had become so emaciated and malnourished on the vegan diet. I've incorporated weights back in my routine, albeit just some small weights that my wife and I bought during lockdown for a little home gym.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely getting stronger. I can tell you I've never put on muscle more quickly than I have now on the carnivore diet with the protein. It's great. I feel great. Scott, I wanted to ask you your opinion on over-exercising. At what point do you think someone can over-exercise and reach that point where they're doing too much and it's having a negative impact? Where does that tipping scale happen for folks?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's very contextual on the rest of your lifestyle. So like I mentioned, when I started my career, I was in a very stressful job. I was working very long hours, very hard, and I wasn't sleeping too well. So I think for that type of person, which is a lot of us, the threshold for too much exercise might be a lot lower than someone who's, even not working, a student or someone who has very low stress, low obligations and responsibility, sleeps very well, recovers very well, follows a carnivore diet. They can probably get away with a lot more, and especially if you're younger too. So I think it's definitely a spectrum. But when you have symptoms like your mind is racing all night or weird appetite dysregulation, you're never hungry. Some of these things can be symptoms of overtraining. And so I think at that point you've gone probably way too far. So I'd say, just make it something that you look forward to, that you feel like energizes you and adds to your life. And something you enjoy, and not something that's a massive drag on your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see some folks have submitted some questions. So thank you. If you put some questions in the question box for Scott, we'll get to them. There's one on dairy, his thoughts on dairy. We'll get to that at the end. We'll have our little Q&A, do some fun questions as well. Cool. We'll talk about coffee. I saw a question about that too. Scott, as it ties into weightlifting and your journey, this is a really important subject for you, for me, and the men out there. especially given the climate we have now with our dear friend the Liver King coming out and the negative stigma that is around testosterone replacement therapy and being on a testosterone supplemental, or sorry, what's the word I'm looking for here? Using that as a person. Now, your journey, you've come out right away and said that you use it, but you had a very specific reason for using it. And I really admire you for sharing and coming out and sharing your part of the journey, because when I was vegan, and I'll let you speak to it in a second, my testosterone went in the toilet. Like, I had none. I literally went and got it measured, and they couldn't hardly even register
Wow.
It was so bad, Scott, and it has come completely back, or not completely, but miles back from where it
That's
was.
great.
But your need for it also had to do with things about being hypergonadal and bone density and things like that, right? So please talk to that for everyone, especially the men out there that might be scared to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's very important that we define some of the terms. So testosterone replacement therapy, people think of like, oh, is he on TRT? Mm-hmm. If you're on testosterone replacement therapy, the key word there is replacement. All you're trying to do is replace your natural production of testosterone with a synthetic compound. So you're not trying to be supraphysiological. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to have greater than normal amount of testosterone. So it really shouldn't, if you're on true TRT, supervised by a doctor who knows what they're doing, you shouldn't be getting any better results than someone who isn't on TRT, as long as that person is healthy. So I think this stigma of, oh, is that person on TRT? Is TRT cheating? Is TRT going to make you look better than the average person? It's kind of nonsense. For me, I had a very medical need. I had below osteoporosis levels of bone mass. So, worse bone mass than like an 80-year-old woman. When I was, early 20s, doing all these things, exercising well, following a ketogenic high protein diet. And I think a lot of that came from rowing. A lot of it came from, using the NSAIDs, chronic dieting, having such low weight, and over stress, overwork. And so my total testosterone, the normal range for men, which is kind of absurd how big it is, but it's 300 to like 900, depending on which scale you look at, nanograms per deciliter. Mine was consistently around 100, so very low. And testosterone and estrogen are incredibly important to building and maintaining bone mass. That's why a lot of women who are post-menopause deteriorate and have osteoporosis, because they don't have the estrogen anymore. So testosterone doesn't just make you strong and aggressive and driven and all these things. It's essential because it helps you create estrogen. It protects your heart. It protects all of your organs. It's very important for your well-being. It's not just important for your sex drive. It's important for your mood. A lot of people who are depressed and put on SSRIs are probably just hypogonadal and low testosterone, and could do just as well if they added testosterone in an appropriate amount. And so I think that's really important. And then to speak about the Liver King, so the Liver King, the problem is not that he is on testosterone replacement therapy, because no one is ever going to look like that on just testosterone replacement therapy. As I said, it's replacement. For him to be 200 pounds, shredded, lean, 5'7", all the time in his late 40s, that man has taken absurd amounts of steroids for a long time to look like that. And he's worked very hard too. But he, it's not the $15,000 of growth hormone he's supposedly taking. Growth hormone doesn't actually help you build muscle. It just helps you recover. It's kind of false in its name. It doesn't really grow muscle. He would need to look like that. He would need to be taking bodybuilding level amounts of anabolic androgenic steroids, which are testosterone and testosterone derivatives. And none of that really came out in the report of what he said he took. It was just a bunch of peptides, which are not natural by any means. So he lied and he scammed people. But he's further lying by not telling people what he's actually taking. So I think the problem there is that he scammed people, he lied, he deceived people, and he openly said that he hasn't taken anything. If he had just said, I'm on TRT, I've taken TRT, he also would be lying because he's clearly taken a lot more than that. So I'll stop on my rant.
No, I appreciate your perspective, Scott, especially as someone that, has come out openly and said, well, I'm on a replacement therapy. These are the reasons why. My last question for you is, you might have noticed recently he has come clean and said that he did take those things. However, in his most recent interview, he said he's coming off everything. Now, I know you've said before that you have to take this for life when you start, correct? Because it's very dangerous. Can you come off ever? How does it work?
It can come off, but it's very hard because what testosterone does is it shuts down your HBTA, which is your, I'm going to screw this up, but it's your hypo something pituitary thyroid axis. And so basically what that means in layman's terms is it tells your body that you don't have to make testosterone because you're getting it exogenously. So all the functions in your brain and your gonads, they basically stop producing luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which are precursors to testosterone. And because you don't have those anymore, when you come off testosterone or other anabolic steroids, you'll be in the gutter, and you'll hope that eventually your testes will say, "Oh no, there is no testosterone. We need to restart." But oftentimes that won't happen for a long time, and you can take what's called a post-cycle therapy, so using drugs like HCT and others, Clomid, to try to restart your natural production. But it's controversial about whether those even do anything beneficial or if those just delay the inevitable. But yeah, it can be really detrimental. It can send you into a massive depression because, like I said, low testosterone can cause depression. It can cause a lot of mood disorders, anxiety, insomnia. And so, yeah, for me, testosterone replacement therapy, I've been on medically supervised TRT for 6 years now. And it's improved my well-being. It's improved my drive. I smile a lot more. I'm more myself. And my bone mass is now normal or slightly above normal, which is awesome. And so that's taken a really long time, but it's had tremendous effects for me. And, I get my blood work every 3 months, which is more often than the doctors even require me to. And so I'm very healthy. But yeah, I think, first of all, I don't think he will go off. Like, no one's going to fact check him on that. He would have to do a lot of blood testing and drug testing to even verify that. But yeah, if you do just come off, you can hope to restart your natural production, but it's dangerous and potentially unhealthy. And you would probably be better to just stay at a very low medically supervised replacement level.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I really appreciate your perspective. It's really great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about now going back to the carnivore diet, Scott, and what it looks like for you now on a daily basis. What are your meals looking like on a daily? So give us a rundown of what you sort of typically eat on a daily basis, how it looks.
Yeah.
For you.
So I eat more meals now because, like I said, I am trying to gain weight, and I also feel like I can digest a lot better when I split it up. So I have kind of 4 meals and a snack, and each of those meals is either chicken or beef, usually steak, but sometimes ground beef. And it would be a, like 1/3 of a pound of each of those. And then I'll supplement it with usually some fruit, and then some form of minimally processed, minimal ingredients, low phytotoxin carb source. Because I need a lot of carbs right now to gain weight and for my specific bodybuilding goals. And I should mention that I think I'm getting pretty close to done with the bodybuilding thing. I'm sick of always being uncomfortably full or, tired and sore. And so I think this will come to a close in the next 9 months or so. But, after I cut down, for the first time, I've been bulking for 3.5 years. I think I'll return to basically a carnivore plus fruit type of diet. But for now, it's basically carnivore plus fruit plus some of those minimally processed carb sources. So that could be, it's typically white rice flour mixed with hot water, which is essentially just ground up white rice. But it doesn't have any of the added vitamin A or folic acid or vitamin E, or some of these things that are added to enriched white rice or other rice products, or iron. Iron is very common. And so that can be dangerous if you're consuming large quantities of it. So I really like that white rice is just very plain, digests super easily for me, and I can eat a lot of it along with my carnivore base.
Awesome. So let's go very quickly. Frank's Carnivore asked, do you include dairy or raw dairy specifically in your diet? Have you ever?
I do. I include dairy, usually in the form of Greek yogurt, occasionally some cheese, and I have not tried raw dairy or kefir, but I think a lot of people have success with it. I think you have to try it for yourself. Dairy can be very inflammatory for some people. A lot of people also have a problem with limiting their consumption of certain forms of dairy, particularly like hard cheeses. You can just eat them endlessly, so that can be a problem if you're trying to diet. So I think during my strict 3 years of carnivore, I mostly didn't include dairy at all, and I felt better without it. But your mileage may vary. Some people do fantastic with dairy. Some people are lactose intolerant, and everything in between. So you have to try it out. Generally, people do better with hard cheeses than soft cheeses, but hard cheeses can also have more histamine, so you have to be careful.
Yeah. Do you, and also Scott, do you drink coffee?
I don't. No. So after starting the carnivore diet, I found out I needed coffee less and less, and I found when I drank coffee on the carnivore diet, it stimulated me too much. I went from like coffee waking me up to coffee making me like wired, and so I actually phased it out when I was on carnivore, and then I went to caffeine pills, which are easier to adjust the dose, more consistent. You don't have to worry about if coffee upsets your stomach. So that was a great transition. And then eventually I just cut those out entirely. My sleep improved dramatically without them, so much. And so that was a big change for me. And now, it's been several years that I haven't touched any caffeine, and I feel great.
Oh man, I'm proud of you for doing that. I'm still on the coffee train. I've made it clear that I still use it. I hope one day to be able to I had it down, Scott. I got down to a little small cup. And then on my 50th birthday trip to Alaska, because of the jet lag and time, I just need the coffee. And man, I'm right back on it again. And it's Christmas, my busiest time from my 9 to 5. So I'm still drinking it, but I will, I hope to, because like you, I know it's not the best for me. I know it's bad for my digestion, but man, I love it in the mornings.
That's fine. There are worse things in life.
There are, for sure, man. Oh man, this has been great. All right, well, let's talk now, Scott, about other lifestyle levers that you may employ to optimize your health. Do you get into stuff like cold plunges, saunas, grounding, meditation? I think you did for a while. Do you still meditate? Talk to me about that.
I've meditated since I was about 14 years old, almost every single day. Now it is every day, but I'm just saying over those 16 years, I've had some days off. But I very much enjoy meditating. It's helped me tremendously, helped my mood, helped my focus, helped my sleep. Really, really encourage people to find a form of meditating that they enjoy. And for some people, meditating can be a barrier. It can be a burden. It can be, they have such high expectations of, am I doing this right? That I think it drives some people away. But meditating can even be, listening to a calming song a few times with your eyes closed, or, just following your breath for a few minutes. It can be very simple. So I love meditating. I take a lot of walks in nature, really big for me. Other lifestyle things I have tried, cold showers. I have done ice baths actually a long time ago, not since starting carnivore. I did it back in the rowing days. I've done sauna. I don't do it regularly. I actually had an infrared sauna in our apartment in Boston, so I'd use that every day. I really like that. And then I have a red light, very similar to the Juve, but a different company. I think it's called Platinum LED. So I for a long time I was using that every night before bed, and I really like that. And yeah, sleep is just the most underrated thing in the world. So finding ways to improve your sleep.
Oh man, for me, Scott, that is such a big part of my journey. And me going back now that I'm don't have the brain fogged ill mind, I can think back to how many years I did not sleep well and how important it is to me now
Yeah,
because of the healing that takes place when we sleep. And I know it's been a big one for you in your journey too.
absolutely.
Scott, before we get into the Q&A and wind down, I just wanted to talk to you about Carnivoricast a little bit because this is how I found you and started a great friendship. I really appreciate your friendship
Yeah,
and again coming on here today. Talk to me about what your plans are with Carnivore Cast and sort of the next stages,
yeah,
and also talk to the folks about. I know you have a Patreon page that they can join, and what the benefits of joining the Patreon page are. I know they can have sort of one-on-one interviews with you. What else can
yeah,
they do by joining that?
yeah. So yeah, thanks so much. Carnivorecast goal is just to continue to put out great episodes every week. Sticking to my one episode a week commitment and trying to have more diverse perspectives. I've had a lot of folks who focus on mental health lately, psychologists and psychiatrists who are using carnivore diet in their practices, which has been really cool. Trying to have more doctors and experts lately, and I think I've done a pretty good job of that. So yeah, nothing else planned besides putting out more great content. And yeah, Patreon is great. If you want to support me there, you can do that. But I think, more so than that, just listening and sharing it. And, if you really want to support the podcast, then use one of the sponsored products from the ads, Optimal Carnivore, like we talked about, or LMNT or Bioptimizers. Those are all products I use daily, and it helps support the show. You don't have to use them. I'm not saying you need them, but yeah, that's the best way to support me.
Awesome, thank you, Scott. All right, let's start getting into a few of the questions that were submitted. Thanks again for those folks that submitted questions for Scott. This was an interesting one, Scott. I think I sent it to you. What videos would you suggest for convincing regular junk food eaters that the carnivore diet is a good diet? Maybe not even, we can talk about books or anything,
Yeah,
presentations that maybe you know of.
yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think of the best resources. I think maybe something with. I think there are a few really pragmatic speakers in the carnivore community. I think Dr. Ted Naiman is fantastic. So maybe something from him. His explanations are really excellent. If you're trying to convince someone, usually you have to use false things like doctors, because people are more likely to believe doctors. But yeah, folks like Rob Wolf,
Yes.
very articulate. He's awesome. I would think about maybe something from Dr. Paul Saladino, something shorter form because he can be long-winded, or Sean Baker. Those are all great resources to just think about people who speak with authority about some of these subjects, and most likely to convince someone. And yeah, just ask the person you're trying to share it with what medium they like to consume. Do they like podcasts? Do they like books? What do they respond to? Do they want a blog post? Because then they're more likely to consume it. But in general, I don't think you should try too hard to convince people to do the diet. I think you should open them up to what it could be like if they're curious. But in my experience, it's not going to be very successful if you're just trying to convince someone to change the way they eat.
Yeah, good answer. Thank you for that. Another person, Jack Sanders, I believe, said, I love butter, but terrified of a heart attack if I eat too much. Any suggestions? I think it speaks to the vilification of saturated fats.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of fantastic interviews I've done, and Casey from Boundless Body Radio I've done with cardiologists. I have a really old interview with Dr. Brett Scher you can try to find, but also just a lot of great content on cholesterol and heart disease. And you can look at Dave Feldman to talk about cholesterol. Those are all folks who have very thoroughly debunked the idea that saturated fat and butter will cause heart disease, and that there isn't a link there. Dr. Philip Ovidia, he's a heart surgeon I had on, and then what's his name? trying to remember the heart doctor I've had on, the type 1 diabetic. It'll come to me. But he's written 2 books on heart disease, and he's fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great. 2 more questions, I believe. I just got we got a late breaking one, and we'll get back to it. But one that got submitted earlier was Miss Joyce, 80-20 ratio for fat to protein. Is that your recommendation? I think it's very nuanced, isn't it, Scott, for the person?
Certainly is, and I'd say that's a good place to start, but you have to experiment with yourself. So try that for 2 or 3 weeks, see how you feel, track. You don't always have to track on a carnivore diet, but when you're playing with ratios, it is a good thing to start with. And then see how you feel like that, and then change it up. Try increasing the protein for 3 weeks, see how you feel, and make relatively small adjustments, and then try the opposite. Try going even higher fat and see how you feel. Ideally, you'll find something that works well for you.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. I went gung-ho and really high fat and found it didn't work. Then I dialed it way back and then found, again, that didn't work, and I actually ended up settling on about an 80-20 for me. It works well.
Dr. Stephen Hussey is
yes.
who he has talked extensively about the true root causes of heart disease. And so I'd highly recommend him for any resources around heart disease.
Okay, and a last late-breaking question before I get into some fun ones to end the show. Carnivore Loco, who logged on, thanks for logging on, asked, what's the best way, you kind of touched on a little bit, but reducing and tapering down caffeine? What's a good strategy for folks?
Yeah, so what I really like is using caffeine pills. But even if you're not willing to use caffeine pills, you can try this. What you could do is try 2 or 3 days at a time at a certain amount, and then try to reduce your amount by, let's say you're starting at 200 milligrams, which is like 1 or 2, 1.5 strong cups of coffee, or 300 milligrams. You would lower it by like 50 milligrams every 3 days. So enough that you don't really notice it. And then eventually you'll get to 0. And that should hopefully relatively minimize your withdrawal symptoms. I don't think going cold turkey is a good idea for anyone.
No, I tend to agree, especially if you're new to the carnivore diet and still drink coffee. Don't eliminate the coffee right away, because it's just, as we know, it's something that you can work on over time and not go cold turkey on, because the withdrawal combined with the adaptation onto the carnivore diet starting out can be very challenging. I really appreciate the content you put out. All right, Scott, as we wind down, I've got some fun questions that I ask every one of my guests that come on, and I'd like to ask you too. What is your favorite current animal protein and the way to eat or cook it?
Steak. Particularly, I've really enjoyed, with the meat prices increasing so much, I enjoy kind of chuck steaks, or steaks made from London broil. You can get some fattier cuts that are actually really good, and some of them are basically like ribeye. And so I love to just sear those on a pan, either rare or medium rare. And yeah, that's delicious. That's my favorite protein, right?
Awesome. Your favorite place to eat out as an animal-based carnivore? Where do you like to go when you go out to eat with the missus?
Yeah, it has to be kind of Texas-style barbecue places. So those are fantastic. You can get brisket, you can get beef ribs, you can get a lot of great meat at a barbecue place.
Yep, fantastic. Your favorite book?
Favorite book? Wow. I would say nonfiction is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Really like that book. I've read it many times. One that I keep going back to. Really enjoy Stoicism in general.
I was going to actually say that. I remember how much you enjoy Stoicism.
Yeah, and then favorite fictional book is probably The Name of the Wind, which is a really excellent kind of coming of age fantasy type book by Patrick Rothfuss that I really like.
Last one. Where do you want to be in 5 years, Scott? What do you want to be doing? What do you want to, if you have any goals, aspirations for 5 years time?
I have at least one child.
Nice.
I want to be settled in a place that both me and my wife love living. And I want to either be really enjoying my job or have started something of my own.
Scott, this has been an absolute pleasure to have you here today, my friend. I really want to thank you again for taking the time out to join me. The work that you're doing with Carnivoristcast is just immeasurable, in my opinion. Make sure you follow Scott on all his platforms. So, Scott, thank you again, my friend. Best to you.
Thank you, James.
Take care now.
Bye.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Carnivorist Chats. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you for listening, and also thank you in advance for liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Thanks again to the good folks at Carnivore Bar and Equip Foods. Don't forget to check the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products. And also, don't forget you can book me for a 30-minute carnivore coaching session through Avero Health. Again, the link will be in the show notes. Until the next time, be well.